started thanks, Gary. So the agenda for tonight's real straightforward. It's a presentation, a little bit of Q&A with Sarah Absher. Director of Community Development for Tillamook County. And the issue or what she's going to be talking about tonight is FEMA, the latest news on FEMA. And thanks, Sarah, for being here this evening. I think you've probably given this presentation maybe once or twice already, so you're probably well heeled on everything. And I think what we've done in the past, Sarah, I think, and back to the STR meeting, I'll try and monitor the chat if I can do that while you're speaking. Sure. And then if there's a pause, I'll kind of point out stuff so that you can, so that you're not distracted by that. So, but with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Sarah, and thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you, Mark. It's so nice to see everyone. Thank you for joining me this evening for this conversation. Just a couple of things before we start, Mark. Thank you for the chat and for monitoring that. This is a tough topic. This is a very heavy topic. We've talked about it before. What I am going to share with you tonight are the updates of where we're at, because there's been some pretty significant changes and an acceleration of compliance requirements that we, meaning myself and jurisdictions across the state, did not anticipate happening so quickly. My intention tonight is not to beat up on FEMA. So I also want to say that. And also want to say that the goals of the biological opinion for water quality, fish recovery, healthy fish populations, healthy riparian corridors are goals that I am confident that we all share, along with Oregonians across the state. The concerns that we have are related to the path that FEMA is forcing us down to achieve these goals. But it is not the goals themselves. And myself and many others across the state feel that there is a better way to achieve these goals without upending property rights and our economies across the state. So I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen. You're going to look at yourself all uncomfortably for just a moment because it's my other screen that's going to show, and we'll be right back. Okay, so let's see. I want to do screen 2 and share. And then if I do a slideshow and beginning, okay. Oh, it did it differently on me. Okay, hang on just a sec. I got to redo this.
While you're doing that, Sarah, can I just remind the audience,
Yes.
if your mics are on, maybe if you can turn them off now. Yeah. But we're getting a little bit of back noise from somewhere. And if you could just turn them off until you're maybe asking a question. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, let me try this again. What in the world is going on here? Okay, we're going to do share screen 1. Okay, are you guys seeing you're seeing updates and status?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, now we're going to work. Okay. So we're going to do a quick recap and then I'm going to get into what's going on, and I definitely want to save time for questions. So let's talk first about, we all know these regulatory changes are stemming from a lawsuit. With that, I want to show you real quick where this applies. So this is not just a Tillamook County issue. This is not just an Oregon coast issue. There are 30 of Oregon's 36 counties that are subject to these code changes for development in areas of special flood hazard. It also impacts roughly 250 cities across the state. Just to kind of give you some ideas of some places that I have been talking with extensively, the city of Beaverton, the majority of their commercial downtown area are in mapped areas of special flood hazard. The city of Eugene, I've talked extensively with the city of Portland, both with their planning and water quality divisions, as well as their engineering divisions. So there's many of us that are pooling resources and having conversations statewide about how we are going to get through these upcoming changes that I'm going to talk to you about tonight and what we're doing to try to help each other. These regulatory updates that are part of this new plan for development requirements in areas mapped special flood hazard include entities and state agencies. This is not just about landowners and private property. Our special districts, specifically our ports, water and sewer districts, our public works department and parks department here. And then you can see there are several state agencies that have infrastructure improvements. ODOT is one. Oregon Department of Aviation, the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. If you think about it, a lot of our parks and our recreation areas are in natural areas. So those are areas that are subject. Even our industrial, timber, agriculture, and aquaculture industries will be impacted by this because many of their improvements in areas for development and business are in mapped areas of special flood hazard. And our watershed and restoration entities are also impacted. So here's a brief history. I'm just going to go through this real quick. Please read the slide on the screen. This is not new legislation. This is not legislation for these code changes that were passed through Congress or at the state legislature level. What we are talking about are changes that are required for development codes for areas that are in mapped flood hazard areas on the FEMA flood insurance rate maps. These are areas that are subject to code changes due to a lawsuit. And the lawsuit started in 2009. So as many of you know, there was a 3-year pause. We worked with Congressman DeFazio in 2018, got a pause on implementation of the biological opinion successfully through Congress. Fast forwarding, Tillamook County has been a cooperating agency in the NEPA review process for implementation. So that's a federal environmental review process. It's required for federal agencies or federal projects that have federal funding. We are still in the midst of that process. And so here's what's happened. FEMA was sued last year, just around this time, by the Northwest Environmental Defense Center and the Center for Biological Diversity. And this was a new lawsuit that was brought about because FEMA had not yet completed the implementation once that pause expired that Congress passed that expired in 2021. And so what has happened is, to satisfy this new lawsuit, FEMA is trying to settle this lawsuit by forcing jurisdictions into interim compliance measures, because full implementation and completion of this NEPA review process is not anticipated to be wholly completed until early 2027. So this is the interim compliance that we're talking about today. And so on July 15th, Tillamook County and all those cities and counties that you saw on that map all received a letter saying that for all of us as communities, because they call us communities, to maintain our good standing in the NFIP and to ensure our continued participation in the NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. So all of you that have flood insurance policies, for us to maintain our good standing, we have to comply with FEMA's pre-interim compliance measures while we wait for full implementation of the biological opinion in Oregon. They've given us 3 options that we have to notify FEMA of what options we are selecting on December 1st. They're saying we have until June to get that option in place, but the reality is that option goes into place December 1st, or we all are looking at temporary moratoriums. until we can complete our process. With that, there's substantial reporting requirements that are going to be changed and added to what we are already required to do for FEMA reporting. So what are those options? And again, I just want to say these apply to areas that are mapped areas of special flood hazard. So properties in Oregon that are outside of these areas, there are no code changes. There are no development code changes, but for those areas that are mapped, there will be changes. So here are the options that we were given: to adopt a new model ordinance that complies with the biological opinion and gets us on that on-ramp towards full compliance. An interim option that will not be available for full compliance is to require a habitat assessment with every floodplain development permit. And just to give you an idea of what that means, FEMA defines development as any human-caused change to improved or unimproved real estate. It's fencing. Technically, it's above-ground garden boxes. It's your driveway. So any human-caused change to improved or unimproved real estate in these mapped areas of special flood hazard requires a floodplain development permit. And so option number 2 with that would be to require a habitat assessment for each floodplain development permit. Option number 3 presented to communities is to just impose a moratorium now on any development in areas of special flood hazard through full implementation, which would be 2027. Options number 1 and 2, because our codes for floodplain development are in our land use program, we have to do what's called a Measure 56 notice. And that is that property rights notice that says that there are regulatory changes that are being considered that may impact the value of your property or may impact your property rights. So the way Oregon's land use program is structured, we just cannot arbitrarily change code requirements and regulation requirements. We have to go through this notification process, public hearings. There's an extensive piece to it. For Tillamook County, we're looking at roughly 10,000 Measure 56 notices for everyone that's in these areas of special flood hazard. And then the typical process to go through for this type of a code amendment, think about like when we did the NESCO and coastal hazards overlay zone and different things. If I can be quick, I'm looking at 4 to 6 months from start to finish. Option 3, like I said, will prohibit all new development in areas of special flood hazard. I have not made a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners on what option to select yet, because I am still learning about these options. But I am very concerned about a moratorium through 2027 or to 2027. So that I have shared with them. So additional concerns. One of the things that has come up has been, what if we just say no? We're not going to take any option, and we will encourage people to look at private flood insurance, Lloyd's of London, Tillamook County, we were outside of the NFIP before 1996. We've lived all these years without the NFIP. Can we do it again? And there's a couple of pieces of that. And I would say probably getting different flood insurance is the easy part. So one of the things FEMA has said is that if we do not comply, we will no longer be eligible for disaster relief dollars in the event of a storm. With that, FEMA, through the state of Oregon, has what's called a federal take permit, which means that, and this is all Endangered Species Act compliance, right? So I know I'm moving quickly on the background stuff, but we've talked about how this lawsuit was because FEMA has allowed development in areas that flood, And as a result, it was determined that that development activity has resulted in a take of Endangered Species Act listed species, specifically coho salmon and orca whale. So FEMA has said that if we do one of the pick-em options, the ordinance, the habitat assessment, or the moratorium, Tillamook County remains safe under FEMA's take permit for the state of Oregon. FEMA has said if we veer off and get out of the NFIP and do not comply, then we are no longer covered under their take permit, and we would have to seek our own take permit to stay in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. So that is why the conversations about, and I've been sharing this with the board of county commissioners who ultimately will tell me what path they want me to go. But what that means is that we are to a point to where if we choose to do nothing and do not comply with one of those three options, the consequences for our communities are severe. Talked about the timeline. The other thing we're looking at is there are concerns about LUBA appeals. Because this is land use, these decisions can be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals. If there is a permit that is denied or taken care of that ends up, I am so sorry. I am embarrassed to say this, but there is someone knocking on my window in my office and it's dark outside and I cannot see. I will be right back.
Yeah. Well, Norma, FEMA.
I'm so sorry about that. That was a person that was walking by. We have a lot of folks who like to hang out by our buildings at night. So I apologize for that. Let me close my window again. So the LUBA process, future permitting, if we deny a permit, a floodplain development permit in the future, someone could ultimately appeal that to the Land Use Board of Appeals. One of the concerns we have is that if LUBA overturns the county's decision and approves it, one of the concerns that we have is how we remain in compliance with the NFIP and balance that and juggle that and maneuver in between these pieces of compliance with both. Because what we are seeing surface are competitive processes, and we have to comply with both. And there are areas where they're starting to conflict. The Board of Property Tax Appeals. So as you can imagine, when we go through these code changes, it is possible that we could end up in a position where property values plummet and people will appeal their taxes to the Board of Property Tax Appeals. And then the ripple effect of what that could do in terms of revenue for schools and special districts. Staffing and technical assistance. FEMA this week started hosting sessions, information for planners and certified floodplain managers to talk about the provisions of the model ordinance and the habitat assessment. So while we received the letter in July with a requirement to select one of those options by December 1st, we are actually now getting the training and the background information we need to make to help our elected officials make an informed decision. So we're running tight on timelines. Into that, after December 1st, until I get our process for Tillamook County done, it is highly likely I will have to talk to County Council about a moratorium in these areas, because there's no way we can meet the deadlines that are before us and do that without some sort of interruption to permitting in these areas. Staffing and technical assistance. These are robust changes. Many of us across the state are unsure how we are going to get folks through permitting processes. With that, the Endangered Species Act is a federal law for code enforcement and other things. We are concerned about how we're going to move forward as now being gatekeepers to make sure that people are complying with the Endangered Species Act and what that means for our enforcement programs. So the other thing, and just jumping down here, the punchline really is that unless people can meet the mitigation requirements, I don't know how we're going to permit new development in these areas. Some of the mitigation requirements are at a 5-to-1 ratio. They require what's called a no net loss of compensatory flood storage, which means if you take away space in the floodplain where it can flood during a flood event, you have to create that space someplace else within the reach of that floodplain at the same elevation. So for those of you that are engineers and others, something really interesting to think about. With those three options, every community or city and county jurisdiction has the option to pick one of those three options. What we are starting to see is if you have something like infrastructure that maybe crosses through multiple jurisdictions, and if jurisdictions are picking different options, it could impact that project as it traverses through those areas. So there are some exemptions for infrastructure out of the model ordinance and the habitat assessment. And those I have highlighted here just to give you an example. But you can see even the People's Utility District and others are impacted by these. These will be clear guidelines for all of us in these areas of special flood hazard. And what I have told Bay City is we're going to permit the project and get a permit in before December 1st so that we can permit their new water line through these areas. So what's happening now? Governor Kotek wrote an excellent letter to FEMA asking them to reconsider the December 1st date. The governor highlighted many reasons why, including the fact that jurisdictions are not prepared to move forward December 1st. With that, we do not have the technical assistance and the guidance we need to do that. And this has not been thought out in terms of how it will impact communities moving forward. Working with Oregon Solutions has come into the fold, looking at long-term solutions on how we can meet mitigation measures. Since late July, I myself have attended and presented in over 50 meetings to date on this statewide. Part of the challenge has been, this has been moving at glacial speed until now. There's a lot of jurisdictions, there's been a lot of turnover, new elected officials, new leadership who were completely unaware of this. The other thing is the changes are so extreme. There are people across the state that never thought it would happen. And then with that, because Tillamook County has remained diligent in being at the table with this issue, since it started, a lot of folks thought it was just a Tillamook County issue, which it is not. So really working around the state. Personally, I am doing that. I am presenting at the League of Oregon Cities. They have a big conference coming up where all the cities attend this week, later this week. So I will be going to Bend to present there. Been talking to a lot of state agencies, special districts, helping cities and other counties work through, helping them get caught up to speed, and then have had extensive conversations with not only Governor Kotek's key policy people in housing and natural resources, but have also been talking to our congressional delegation field staff and reporting with them about the concerns and the questions we have. So next steps, I'm continuing with town halls and presentations, working on a communication strategy with the Board of County Commissioners as we move through this decision-making process of what implementation measure, working on a plan of action. I do anticipate lawsuits to come about from this. So talking about how we as a county are going to be prepared for that and what our role in that will be. Getting a legislative text amendment process underway and then starting to prepare our Tillamook County Planning Commission, who will make the recommendation of what to do with whatever pick'em option the board authorizes me to move forward with. So we will be holding a planning commission workshop. I'm reaching out to our planning commission members now. That will be November 14th. To at least prepare them to start talking about the language in those options for the model ordinance and the habitat assessment. And then we're going to move forward with that multi-thousand piece mailing with that notice for all landowners in these areas to let them know what's coming. So many of you online might be wondering, I wonder if my property's in. That's a good question. So the easiest way to find your property or Nescoin is you want to Google FEMA flood maps. And what you want to do is look for National Flood Hazard Layer. And Mark, I will send you this PowerPoint so that you can share it, because I think these links are live. So you could go to my PowerPoint and find it. But National Flood Hazard Layer, once you Google and get to the FEMA map site, and you don't want the map service center, you want to go to the National Flood Hazard Layer. It's going to bring you here. So this is a GIS interactive mapping tool. You can put Nescoin, Oregon up here. You can put your address up here. You can put your address in Sherwood or West Lynn or Lake Oswego if you own more than one resident or your business. And so you're going to type in the address here or the place, Nescoin, Oregon, hit search, and it's going to bring you to your map of your area. So let's see if I can do this here. Let me know if you guys see my screen. Are you guys following my screen change?
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys seeing it? Okay.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, great. So I clicked on that, and then, so this is that page I just showed you. You're going to hit OK. And here, I'm just going to write in Nescoin, Oregon. And it's going to take me to Nescoin. You're going to want to get rid of that box. And then using my wheel of my mouse or your zoom feature over here, you just keep scrolling in. So everybody see Nescoin?
Yeah.
Okay. All of the areas in blue are impacted.
Wow.
Nescoin has two sources of flooding. You have ocean flooding and you have riverine flooding, creeks and streams. So you can go in very closely. Nescoin does not have a dune. Dune is nature's line of defense for ocean flooding. So all of these properties in blue are impacted. There are provisions for maintenance of structures, or if a home burns down, the ability to replace it within the exact same footprint. But what is challenging about this is when you hit what's called the substantial improvement threshold, where the value accumulated of the work you've done on a home exceeds the real market, 50% of the real market value of the home, then you start getting into new regulations. I'm still trying to figure out what that means. I am meeting with FEMA again on Monday. And so my questions include, what happens when people hit a substantial improvement threshold and they're re-roofing and they're not expanding the footprint? You know, in my opinion, that's something you should be able to do without having to get a habitat assessment. With these moratoriums that we are all facing as we wait and go through our processes to get into compliance, December and January and February are a terrible time of year for us. What if we get a big storm? What if a culvert blows out? What if somebody's, porch gets damaged, or again, their roof? What does that mean? Because with a moratorium, traditionally, it means no development, right? No development permits. So I am working with county council on what that means. Some of the other things that we are looking at is we are going to have to start tracking impervious surface. And the amount of fill activity. So for new development, I'm thinking of a home. Most likely, folks are going to have to hire a surveyor who's going to have to give me before and after topography elevations so I can see how much fill was added, removed, and where those net changes were. So, one of the things that I am concerned about in these areas is that folks who have been able to work with a contractor and go through their own permitting processes in these areas, I'm very concerned those days are over. There are a lot of professionals that will have to be hired to help someone get through a process. So I'm just going through here so you all can see. The brown does not matter. The brown doesn't matter. If you don't see a color over the picture, you're in great shape. It's the blue. It's this turquoisey blue color. So that's how you find your spot. So here's the part that gets interesting. The permitting process has always been focused on flood risk reduction. It's been focused on elevating the structures, elevating utilities, right? Preventing loss of life and property. The permitting path is now going to be multi-pronged. You're still going to have that piece of the flood risk reduction, right? Reduce the risk of exposure to flooding. But now you have two additional elements to it. You have a habitat element in terms of fish egress. So new development cannot prohibit or impede fish passage. And so what that means is during a flood event, fish have to be able to maneuver freely through that floodplain. A lot of construction, and you guys have it in Nescoin, you might be in a flood area, but you can still have the ability to build a conventional foundation. So you have your foundation and you have your flood vents, and the flood vent area has to be proportionate to the area of the home, and it's inches and square feet. Square inches in the vents has to match the square feet of the building footprint. And those vents cannot be higher than 12 inches from finished grade. And the reason is because you want to prevent the buildup of hydrostatic pressure so that in the event of a flood, you don't have your foundation shift or get damaged, right? So the vent serves to make sure the water can flow through the bottom of the structure and it doesn't hurt your foundation or push and pull on other houses in your area. That no longer is enough. I do not anticipate we will be able to do conventional foundation construction in these areas anymore, because while the water can get through, the fish cannot. So when you have a building footprint, you might be able to elevate it and vent it for the flood risk element, but now you're not meeting that fish passage requirement. So that's going to be, to me, one of the easiest remedies for that is just putting everything on pilings and piers. That works for residential construction. We already see it. It's required in floodways and areas that are subject to ocean flooding. It's something that we could do for residential and commercial construction. It does increase the cost of construction. Where we are finding difficulties with that option is for barns. Right, because our farms are in floodplains, and our farmlands serve as flood storage. So part of that, in terms of trying to find alternative construction options, we can find it that it can meet for some, but not for others. So the other piece of this is what's called a no net loss of flood storage. And what that means is that you have that floodplain area that during a flood from the ground to base flood elevation, you have a space where the water goes. And what it's saying is that in that space that's already been determined, you cannot have a no net loss. So the question is, you can't dig a hole in your backyard. How do you achieve and maintain that no net loss without having to take some other structure at the same elevation away? So one of the things that we are looking at with mitigation requirements is how do we create that offset of new flood storage someplace else at the same elevation? And depending on where it is, it could be a 1-to-1 ratio or it could be a 2-to-1 ratio. So working with teams of engineers and others, we are trying to figure this out. Because with that, if we are creating new flood storage, we also have to be careful not to alter the flow of floodwaters for other structures and properties in that area where we are creating that new flood storage. And then lastly, just thinking about your maps and your blue areas, there is a requirement for a 170-foot setback from any creek or stream. If the boundary of that blue area ends before the 170 feet, the 170 feet ends as well. So again, because these regulations only apply to these mapped areas, wherever that boundary ends, these regulation requirements end, and it's whatever our codes say for standard development. But there's a lot to this. There's varying mitigation options. Like I said, we're just really concerned statewide about how people in areas are going to meet them. Because if the way that all of these options read, the first step is to avoid impacts. Avoid new impacts, no new impacts in these areas. And so with that, then all of the mitigation requirements are pretty severe. Even with our habitat and restoration communities, these same provisions will apply. And so again, trying to meet the test of all of them to meet now that multi-prong approach for a permit is something we are trying to figure out how to do so that when people want to come in with a permit, we can find a way to help them. So my big day with FEMA again is next Monday. So I will be working through more of this. The Planning Commission workshop will be public and you can access it online. So for those of you that want to listen in on that, especially folks that didn't join us tonight, your neighbors and your friends that you think might be interested in this, please let them know that that is coming. It's the second Thursday of the month, and I will make sure we have a link on the calendar. But I wanted to talk to you guys tonight because I want to start preparing you as a community for the changes that are coming in these areas. And as you can see by that map, there's a lot of areas in Nescoin that will be impacted by this. So, any questions? It's a heavy topic and it's a lot.
I don't see any questions.
No,
people are just thinking probably.
I'm raising my hand if I could ask.
Okay. Oh,
you.
Nancy. Okay, Nancy. Nancy and then Christy, I see. Okay, Nancy, go ahead.
So this is more than just Oregon, right, Sarah? This would be nationwide?
No,
just Oregon.
This is Oregon. FEMA was sued in Washington and settled, but the biological opinion and the area of focus was largely the Puget Sound area. It was not statewide. And now there is a lawsuit with FEMA in California. And I heard at a conference a couple of weeks ago, they are looking at Idaho.
Okay, so it could be
So
growing.
we do think that it is moving across the nation. One of the things, I sit on a board for an entity called Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. It is a public-private partnership. And I actually signed the declaration for Tillamook County as part of that entity to sue FEMA in 2018 to stop the implementation. And that was right before DeFazio went through Congress and it pause. We are looking again at various avenues for litigation to that 2016 biological opinion again. A couple of the premises, Nancy, is that one, FEMA is not a regulatory entity. They are emergency management and flood insurance. And so where's their authority to do this? But one of the other pieces is that this did not go through Congress as legislative rulemaking. And lastly, if the idea is to bring the flood insurance program into ESA compliance, because every state has different ESA listed species, no one's questioning the need to do that, but is it more appropriate to do a nationwide programmatic approach instead of having each state cherry picked off in some fashion through litigation instead of legislative action?
Yeah, because it seems like I've got a few here, but you know, it sounds like if the governor can get a delay, that would be helpful. It seems like they're really requiring something awfully quickly. But if the main concern is salmon and orcas, changing someone's roof or a deck, it seems like there's really no relationship there. So it sounds like your meeting with FEMA is going to be really crucial on understanding what these requirements are going to be. But it's also at odds with SB 406, right? I mean, where they're trying, I mean,
Oh,
how can you manage these two conflicting requirements?
well, and that has been really in my conversations with the governor's office. You know, what got the attention of the governor's office was housing, because Governor Kotak has made some very robust strides and taking very bold action across the state to look at housing initiatives and bring housing to our state. And in every jurisdiction, this completely contradicts those efforts. And one of the things, like when I was talking with her senior housing policy analyst, one of the things that we were talking about is you may have a property that's outside of those shaded areas that is intended for residential development. However, if you have to bring a new road or infrastructure
Right?
through one of those mapped areas, your property is no longer developable, right? I mean, ideally, theoretically, because you have to have both. And if you can't get both, the properties that you think can still be developed, that may not be the case. And I know
Yeah.
that that was a huge reason behind that letter. And that's like League of Oregon Cities, Association of Oregon Counties. I mean, everybody's coming together to say this is completely undermining so many other efforts across the state. Please stop and let us figure out a better way.
Yeah, it just seems awfully unreasonable. So it sounds like it's possible that the state could decide to file a suit against this.
Yeah, based on the conversations that I have had, I don't think that's likely. I think it will be Oregonians for Floodplain Protection that's going to pick up the ball. State agencies, a lot of them get FEMA funding, as do
Right.
we, right? For all kinds of
Yeah.
things. So there's a delicate relationship there, but the Creamery has been a huge supporter and advocate, especially because, this is going to compromise our farmers in a lot of different ways. So, and again, I just want to say the goals are not in question by anyone. It's the path.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Christy, is it Christy Foster?
Yeah.
Hey,
Hi, Sarah.
Christy?
Thank you for that. I know this is not fun for you, but I appreciate you keeping us all informed. You and I had a previous conversation, and I'm just wondering if you've learned anything more about the mitigation requirements, if they do come through. Where does the mitigation, or how far away from the change can the mitigation occur? Is it countywide?
Yeah.
Is it citywide? Have you heard anything else?
So that's great. And so for those of you who have not met Christy, Christy is the executive director of the Tillamook Estuaries Partnership. Great friend of mine, great partner. We do a lot of good work together. And she is a smart lady that I reached out to say, I need help with mitigation. What can we do to partner? Right? Because again, being able to meet mitigation requirements is going to be critical to being able to permit. So she and I had a conversation. So what I have learned is there are different mitigation ratios depending on where you are at in terms of development and what reach you are at for mitigation. So if you are in the same reach, it is different than if you are in a different river reach, or floodplain reach, which is more, it's double. I had a meeting with the Natural Resources Policy Advisor for the Governor's Office, Oregon Solutions, and the City of Portland. And the City of Portland is looking at setting up a mitigation bank. And the price tag to stand it up, they estimate, is roughly $20 million. And the mitigation credit cost per acre, they are estimating at $350,000 per acre, which is triple what a wetland mitigation credit is anywhere. So in reaching out with Oregon Solutions, part of what we're talking about is a long-term plan. None of this is going to get resolved overnight, even if there's a lawsuit. This is a marathon and we are in for a long haul. But could Oregon Solutions step in and help us as a state develop a mitigation program that helps everyone and benefits everyone? So that's one of the conversations that I am taking part in right now.
Right.
So those are my
Thank
updates.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I told the governor's office was with OWEB money, an OWEB, like OWEB funded projects, it would be great if there could be an exception for mitigation for flood development, because right now, because of those federal funding nexus limitations, like I couldn't set up a mitigation bank with Christy in Tillamook County and have people pay in for her to do the good work that she's doing and keep doing restoration, because her projects have funding limitations that will not allow for this outside funding and help, which is kind of doesn't make sense. So that was feedback that I gave them, Christy, we need to be able to work together on this.
Yeah, because right now mitigation dollars cannot be used for restoration. So,
right.
Right. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for coming tonight.
I think we've got a question, Christy. I think Gary?
Yeah, so
Okay.
this is a question that came directly on the chat to the
Oh,
host. Oh, everybody can't see it. This is from Barbara Gordon, and she was asking, could you repeat the 170-foot setback issue one more time?
Yes.
And
Yes.
also, is there any type of short-term moratorium, like 6 months, the county could adopt?
Thank you. So I am probably going to have to recommend to the board that they consider a temporary moratorium, just because it is middle of October and we have to make a decision December 1st. And there is no way I can get through the process that I need to get through to update our codes by December 1st. The city of Seaside and Clatsop County have already started their notification processes for temporary moratoriums. This will be what many of us will do across the state so that we don't compromise our standing in the National Flood Insurance Program between now and getting those, whether the model ordinance or the habitat assessment, embedded and folded into our program. And then the 170 feet. So I'm going to go back to my map here real quick, because I think this is the best way to show this. And Tom, I am delighted you have your hand up and I cannot wait to hear what you ask, but I'm gonna show this here real quick. Okay, so this is an easy part. So we got the creek here, right? This is Proposal Rock Loop, Proposal Rock subdivision. Here's the creek. So technically, there's a 170-foot setback from that creek. However, this area would not be subject to that 170 feet. And any areas, let's say, like if it was development over here across the highway, that 170-foot boundary is going to end at the flood boundary. It doesn't carry all the way across. Does that make sense to everybody? So I got a measurement tool here. So if I did from the creek here and I went out, oh boy, I really overshot that, didn't I? Okay. So this property, even though this part of the property is within 170 feet of that creek, that 170-foot setback also ends where that blue shaded special flood hazard area ends. Just like that 170 feet, we measure from here. Oh, now it's not, let me do it. If we measure this way, that 170 feet does not impact these properties that are actually mapped out. But spanning across, it could impact these. So I hope that explains how that works. The 170 feet only applies in those mapped areas of special flood hazard. And there's a lot of scenarios where you have a mapped body of water, but especially due to elevation changes that can happen quickly, that flood boundary may end close to that body of water. Or if it's flat, it could extend out. It just depends. But that 170 feet only extends to the boundary of the area of special flood hazard. And then again, in the ordinance and in the habitat assessment, there is a provision to reduce that 170-foot setback. But again, what I am concerned about is I don't know how to get people to help them achieve the mitigation ratios. It will also include tree removal. So that typically we see folks clear at least a couple of trees for new development, or, there might be a tree that they want to get rid of on their property for whatever reason, too much shade. I don't know. People do things all the time for reasons that make sense to them. You're not going to be able to remove those trees greater than 6 inches in diameter breast height in these areas without mitigating. And the mitigation ratios, depending on the diameter breast height of the tree, could be 5-to-1. So things we're figuring out, but I hope that answered the 170-foot question.
Okay. Tom, I think you've got a question. Tom Perhoda.
Hey, Sarah, how are you? And
Hi, Tom.
there are,
Fine, thanks.
oh, my phone's talking to me. Well, first of all, thank you. There are a lot of very smart people on this Zoom conference, and we're all at least largely lost.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was going to say it's a train wreck, but it's at least a mess. And
It's a train wreck.
thank you for staying on top of it. My question is, I mean, the one thing that became clear to me as you were going forward is that of all of these options under the circumstances and the time constraints, you're probably going to have some kind of moratorium for, whatever the time period might be, 6 months.
Yeah.
Just for example, what would a moratorium mean? Does it mean that there's no development of any type within the 6 months, or does it only mean that that there cannot be any development within those areas that are affected, that are within the floodplain and affected by the floodplain?
Mhm. Yeah, so that's a great question, Tom, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. I had a brief conversation with the board on this on October 2nd. You can go, I did a presentation similar to this one at a board briefing. So that is online with the Board of Commissioners office. So all of this only applies to those mapped areas of special flood hazard, right? Those blue areas. So everything we're talking about, if you're not in one of those areas, even a moratorium does not apply. But just practically speaking, we cannot meet all of our statutory obligations and what FEMA wants us to do without having some kind of a temporary moratorium. So one of like some of the questions I'm asking FEMA is, we have a storm and someone needs to repair their roof. If there is a moratorium on floodplain development permits, because FEMA's definition of development is any human caused change, what does that mean? Like even down to a mechanical permit to fix a heat pump, or it's winter and somebody's furnace goes out and they need a new furnace. Like, what are we going to do? So I'm working between FEMA, and this is not something, so we have a different attorney. Her name is Molly Lawrence. She's with Van Ness. And so she's been representing Oregonians for floodplain protection. So she is the one that I work with on this largely. But bringing her to the table with county council to talk about how that moratorium would be constructed, because it has to be temporary, right? They have to have a sunset date. You can't have one indefinitely. There's a whole legal process that goes with putting one into place. So those are things that we are working through now to bring to the board to prepare them. The letter that FEMA wrote said you have to pick an option by December 1st. So when all of this started in July, we were like, okay, we let you know what we're going to do in December 1, and then we keep going and we have to have that new pick-up option in place by June. But from December to June, we permit under our current regulatory programs. And they said, no, you either, and this part was not in the letter. So there's a lot of upset folks across the state in that what they meant was you have to inform us of what pick-em option you're doing, and then you either don't permit or you require a habitat assessment with each floodplain development permit until your pick-em option is in place. Well, the way Oregon's land use laws work, you don't just get to change the rules one day. You have to do that Measure 56 notice and all of these steps. So then DLCD's gotten involved to say, no, you can't just arbitrarily change your land use regulations. There is a statutory required process to do that. So what that told all of us was that between December 1st and when we get that pick-em option adopted, we can't do floodplain development permitting. And some jurisdictions, this is impacting all of those 30 counties and 250 cities differently. Tillamook County is one of the most impacted areas. We have some of the largest floodplains. City of Beaverton is like their new transit center that they've been doing all this long range planning for years runs right through one of those blue mapped areas. Like, it's a big deal. Some jurisdictions have said, we don't hardly have any floodplains. They're in our park areas. We're doing the moratorium. Don't care. Easy peasy. We're done. Some are so afraid of that December 1st deadline, they've just selected our ordinance or the habitat assessment and are already going through legislative text amendment processes. And we don't even know yet fully from FEMA how to permit, because they are just giving us the workshops and the sessions starting tomorrow and Monday. So for me, it was, I don't want to say, let's just do something to get it done, because I don't fully understand these options myself. And I am not alone in that. And it makes me feel better when people that that are engineers and others that also do this work are going, we don't know how to do it either. So we are looking at a moratorium. We've got to figure out what that means for emergency permitting. If we have a storm and a culvert blows out, I don't know how to help ODOT or Public Works if there's a moratorium in effect, because they have to get floodplain development permits too. So these are all of the things that we are scrambling to figure out how to do and get done.
Wow.
The Department of Justice, Jesse Ratcliffe, has been intimately involved. Really appreciative of his help. There have been some state agency meetings that DLCD convened. I actually presented at those. But we're all trying to figure out what to do for our transportation agencies like ODOT, the Federal Highway Commission, and Public Works. And I would say even our environmental restoration processes, if they have to go through a federal permit review process and get like basically what's called a 404 permit or some sort of federal permit that requires an environmental impact assessment, then substitute that for the two prongs of our permitting process for a floodplain development permit. But they've still got to get through that flood risk reduction element as well. But if the project does not have a federal permitting nexus, even for ODOT and Public Works, they have to fully comply with whatever pick'em option we pick.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all your work on this and your knowledge. I mean, it's with all of the other things that you have to do, this is there so many variables and factors that have to be considered that it's mind-boggling. My wife's in the background and giving me words.
Hey, it's not my.
I was gonna say it was troubling, but mind-boggling is a good word.
Well, so and I know you heard my federal my take permit spiel,
Yeah.
but okay, so let's talk about Nescoin specifically. And I feel like I'm just piling bad news upon bad news, but I also I want us all to walk through this with our eyes as wide open as possible because it's a big deal. There are provisions for maintenance in both options of the model ordinance and the habitat assessment. So let's talk about riprap revetments because Nescoin has a lot of that, and it's really important for your community to be able to maintain that. Maintenance is exempt from these new requirements, but here's what is not maintenance. If the maintenance is needed because of erosion and flooding, if you change the prism, or if you expand the toe, I don't know how you maintain riprap when you're maintaining it because obviously there's been a flood event or some sort of erosion that has resulted in the need to fix it. I don't know how you add boulders without changing the prism. And you're most likely going to expand the toe because you're putting new rocks in the bottom. So one of the questions, as I keep going through all of this, one of the questions that I've also raised with DLCD and OPRD, who helps with those permits, is how do we help people maintain riprap revetments if they fall out of those exceptions? Because now you're right in that mitigation bucket that I can't figure out how to walk you through. And the costs to permit anything are going to skyrocket because it will be a team of biologists and engineers that are going to have to put your reports together for you to even try to get through a permitting process. So Nesco and specifically the riprap revetments are a huge concern of mine. And I am trying to figure out what the answer is for all of you so that your community can maintain those.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Tom. Is that it?
I mean, I've got more terrible answers
Yeah,
if
I
you've
know.
got more questions.
You better stop, Tom.
I'm finished. Well, actually, I talked very little. I was listening, which
Yeah.
is,
No,
which is an exception to the rule. But Susan's got a question, so.
yeah, Susan. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just dialed up on my iPad the FEMA
Yeah.
flood hazard layer that you mentioned, Sarah. And I noticed that there are some properties on breakers in the village, specifically the Chelan,
Mhm.
where some of the building, but not all of the building,
Yeah.
is in a flood zone.
Mhm.
And like one of the units is not in a flood zone, but it's all part of a building. What happens if part is in and part is out?
That is a great question. If part of a building is in and part of it is out, FEMA looks at the whole building being in. So if you have a vacant piece of property and that flood line bisects it, you want to build on the side that doesn't have the flood. Just like if you want to build a shop on your property or a garage and you've got part of it in and part of it out, you want to get that shop out of that area. The Clover restaurant, the Dory restaurant in Cloverdale, you guys know what I'm talking about there on the highway? That restaurant, old restaurant, been there for forever on the river. Literally the corner, one of the corners of that building clips that flood zone. We have to treat the entire building like it's in. And that's current rules. So yeah, if a part of your structure is in, your whole structure is in.
I do have another question that's just informational. If we want to keep up with this, is the next best thing to attend the planning commission meeting in November?
Yes.
I guess either in person or virtually.
Mhm.
By then, you may have more answers, I'm thinking.
Yes. Yes. FEMA has, for planners and certified floodplain managers, which I am both, they have these sessions set up for us to go over those two options. They have several sessions now lined up starting, I think, tomorrow through mid-November, and I have signed up for almost all of them. Just because people ask different questions, there's different scenarios that come up, and I want to hear them because I want to hear what FEMA is saying. So by the 14th, yes, I should have more information, and we'll probably, if not already have gone to the board for authorization of a direction, we'll be very close to that. And so the planning commission will literally just be information to say, here's what the options look like. It's going to be a lot of the information I've shared with you tonight so that they are prepared and they can start getting into that mindset of what we're looking at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I would say I'm going to Garibaldi, Rockaway, Tillamook. I am reporting back to them over the next couple of weeks, but you have heard tonight everything that I will be sharing with them. I don't expect any updates between now and then. So November 14th at that workshop, just to listen in, it'll just be information only, would probably be the best.
Okay. All right. Okay, Sarah, I guess there's a question. Could you put the link to the flood hazard map in the chat, maybe?
I would love to.
Okay.
And I'll send you my slide deck, Mark, so you guys can post that because that link should be live on there too.
Okay. And then,
And I think Nancy has her hand up.
oh, Nancy, go ahead.
Okay, so obviously it's premature now, and like others, thank you so much, Sarah, for taking the time on behalf of all of us to attend and all the work you're doing. Will there be a time when you would be looking to the NCAC for any kind of input to the process, since it seems like that would be one of our key missions, but it sounds like there's so little time. You mean, we don't meet again
Yeah.
until December, although we could call a special meeting. Would we have an opportunity to provide input on these three options with more information that you would give us?
I will have to go to the board at a public meeting to talk about the options and get authorization and direction from them on which option to take. So I would say that is something that, you know, you're welcome at any time to put a letter together. I do have some folks in different communities that are actually circulating a petition to tell the board not to do anything and to just challenge all of this. That's happening. And then in terms of once there's direction, so the CAC, this is a legislative text amendment process, right? So the NCAC, you know, we look to you to provide comments and feedback on the proposed code updates. The challenge with this process specifically, and this is one of these processes I don't like, we're not going to get to wordsmith the language. We're not going to get to say, can you change this or add this or take this out? Because I will have to adopt what FEMA tells me to adopt. And words matter. They are very particular about wording. So basically, they've handed me these documents and said, put them in. So your two options.
Sounds
I
like an
don't want
impossible
to.
situation.
It is. Yeah, it is. And I would say, like, I don't want to discourage the NCAC or anyone from participating and sharing their feelings about this. I think it's really important to do that. I think other things that could be done, please write to our state legislature, please write to our congressional delegates. Like, they need to hear from us about this. So, you know, I think voices in this process are important, even if at the end of the day, we're stuck with having to choose something and we can't change anything about it. That participation, your participation is important and it's appreciated.
So perhaps some sample wording, or maybe you can't do anything officially, I don't know, but would there be, maybe we could talk offline, but something that we could use and perhaps have another special meeting or something, we could talk about it as a board, but
Yeah.
something that would help so people wouldn't have to start from scratch and we'd have a list of people to contact, etc.
Sure. Yeah. For Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, we put some sample letters together for businesses and industries and jurisdictions. You know, we are concerned about these things, and then areas to personalize it. You know, because again, we're not challenging, nobody's upset about the goals. It's
Right.
the path.
It's the timing.
Yeah. So yes, I am happy to work with you offline on that. And then you guys will get notice of when those hearings will start. I have to send it out at least 35 days in advance. So every property owner in Nescoin who has that flood mapped on their property, whether it's this much or the whole thing, is going to get that notice. And then the NCAC, of course, too, because it's a legislative text amendment process. It's part of what your role is to provide feedback and input. So, you know, you can attend the hearings, you can write something, it'll go to the planning commission and to the board. You can participate in all the hearings. Yeah.
And it really sounds like even if you're in the brown area or not in the blue area, you're still affected from what you were saying, the infrastructure goes through.
Yeah.
So really, everybody should probably have a say.
Well, and here is the next step in the parade of concerning pieces of this is in the biological opinion that was written by National Marine Fisheries in 2016. What we are doing is part of the recommendations of reasonable and prudent alternatives. Remapping is another, and that will come. It is because what the reasoning behind it is that FEMA's mapping methodology is not accurate. It does not take into account things like climate change, sea level rise, And so those maps will be updated.
Oh,
So
that
we're
could
just getting
affect-
started. Yeah.
That could affect zoning and everything else.
Yes, it'll impact buildable land inventories. Yeah, I mean, it's starting. But it's what, it took us so long to get the other maps adopted. We went from 1978 maps to 2018.
Yeah.
So I will be shocked if those maps are done with all of us still sitting around this table. Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing. I don't know how you're doing it all, but thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here, and thank you for listening to me tonight and sharing your thoughts. So
Okay.
more to come. Mhm.
Okay. I thank you, like everybody, Sarah, for sharing this with us. Um, I think we're aware of this now, and so I think we'll be following this. And not quite sure what course we're going to take. We have an executive committee meeting next week where we talk about some things, agenda items.
Mhm.
So we'll
Yeah,
get,
and I'm happy to send you, so the model ordinance and the habitat assessment guide are public documents. I can send those to you as well. If you guys I mean, people are curious, they want to look at them and see them.
yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, because of the mitigation ratios in the model ordinance, I don't know how we're going to get people through them. It would basically be like adopting an ordinance that's not going to allow you to develop. The habitat assessment appears right now to be the more viable option. But a habitat assessment could cost someone thousands of dollars to build a deck, to prove no take and no harm of ESA listed species. And the habitat assessment requires an analysis of 16 different ESA listed species, not just orca, whale, and salmon, coho salmon. So there's just some pieces there that myself and others are trying to pull through and look through, but you are all welcome to take a look at those documents. I'd love to know what you think.
Okay, we maybe you can send those to us at the admin.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I'll send my slides because
Okay.
then that link to the flood maps are there. And then and the history, and
Yeah.
then I'll send you those documents. And then the July 15th letter is already on the DCD homepage.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I don't see any other questions, Sarah. So you're busy, and thank you for your time this evening. I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn the meeting for this evening, and I think there'll be a lot of conversations about this, so locally and maybe with you. So thanks very much.
Yes. Thank you all so much. It's nice to see you. Thank you
Night,
for coming tonight. Have a good night.